ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will.
In 1957, 9 Black students from local all-Black high school Horace Mann integrated the all-white Central High. These students, who became known as the Little Rock Nine, were among the first to implement the Supreme Court's 1954 desegregation ruling. They attracted national and international attention as they opened a frontier for future desegregation in the United States, significantly impacting legal and social atmospheres surrounding segregation and race. Segregation in the 1950s originated from the 1896 Supreme Court case Plessy v. Ferguson, which ruled that separate but equal accommodations in railroad cars satisfied the Constitution's 14th Amendment. This set precedent for the segregation of all public facilities, including schools.
And very different in the sense that resources were not delegated to the Black schools at the same levels to the white schools. So that the school for colored children would be maybe a one-room building for several grades. Often they wouldn't even have bathroom facilities in the building. The teachers had to teach several grades by themselves, not having teachers along different levels. And that's particularly true in rural areas. In urban areas, it might be a little bit better, but what is true and consistent is that resources allocated for colored schools were not equal to the resources given to white schools.
NAACP members in Kansas petitioned the Supreme Court to change the ruling, and in 1954, the landmark case Brown v. the Board of Education ruled that segregation in schools was unconstitutional. Because the Supreme Court did not outline a timeline for integration, pushback and anger from Southern whites meant that integration in the South would take a long time.
Keep them niggas on their own school. They ain't got no business in here with them white.
And 3 years later in Arkansas, the Little Rock Nine were at the forefront of the battle to prove that the Brown v. Board ruling could work. After Arkansas State President of the NAACP, Daisy Bates, petitioned the Little Rock School Board, they agreed to adhere to the Brown decision. Bates began gathering students who were interested in transferring from local Black high school Horace Mann to the well-funded and all-white Central High School.
And I feel that Central's educational program would be best to prepare me for college than at the all-Negro high school Horace Mann.
On September 4th, 1957, the Little Rock Nine attempted their first entrance into Central High School, only to be met with a violent white mob. They spat, screamed, and threw acid at the students trying to enter the building and chased Black reporters who were covering the event. Elizabeth Eckford, who was separated from the group on the first day, had to face the screaming and taunting mob by herself. The Nine and their families feared for their lives.
We started running as fast as we could, she in her heels, and at one point she stepped out of them, and at one point she stopped just a moment and handed me the car keys, and I said, "I'm not leaving you," and she said, you gotta go, you're faster than I am, go. And I said, no ma'am, and she slapped me, the only time in her life she ever slapped me. She said, you go now, you saved your life, I've worked hard, you go.
When they finally reached the entrance, the Arkansas National Guard refused to let them into the school. Governor Orville Faubus of Arkansas and his superintendent, Virgil Blossom, had disobeyed direct orders from President Eisenhower, forcing the Nine to wait another 3 weeks before entering the school.
Faubus was a fairly moderate to liberal governor at the time he came in, and his attitudes changed over time. In part because of the way that Brown polarized politics in the South and in Arkansas. In 1956, Arkansas governors had a 2-year term then. In 1956, he was up against Jim Johnson, who was head of the White Citizens Councils, which had been organized to oppose Brown v. Board of Education. And that kind of drove Faubus to take a firmer, hardline segregationist stance.
That it will not be possible to restore
are to maintain order and protect the lives and property of the citizens if forcible integration is carried out tomorrow in the schools of this community.
Faubus secured his re-election and was established as a Southern hero in Arkansas among white conservatives, but faced backlash from integrationists everywhere. Prominent Americans such as Louis Armstrong supported criticism towards the U.S., saying, "The way they're treating my people in the South, the government can go to hell," and playing the Star-Spangled Banner in protest. Musician Charles Mingus wrote a song called Fables of Faubus to condemn Faubus's actions.
Why is he so sick and ridiculous? Then he's a fool.
Eisenhower was nationally and internationally scrutinized as millions analyzed the event on the news.
Well, I think the process itself, especially nationally, internationally, was important because it put the United States in a bad light. That you're in the middle of the Cold War, in which the United States is trying to tell the rest of the world that democracy is the best way of life. And it becomes sort of an embarrassment to then President Eisenhower to have crowds of people showing up to deny 9 black children the right to go to school.
This pressure, along with the need to assert federal dominance and back up the Supreme Court, pushed Eisenhower to sign an executive court order to send in 1,000 guards from the 101st Airborne Division, the same soldiers who fought in World War II, to enforce the return of the Little Rock Nine to Central High School on September 25, 1957.
Then issued an executive order directing the use of troops under federal authority to aid in the execution of federal law at Little Rock, Arkansas. Disorderly mobs have deliberately prevented the carrying out of proper orders from a federal court.
Throughout the 1957 to 1958 school year, the Little Rock Nine had an extremely difficult time attending classes. When Beals asked the administration why the 9 students had no overlapping classes in their schedules, she was told, "You wanted integration, you got integration."
What do you think of what is happening, and will you go to school if you...
No, sir, I will not.
There was so much backlash from the public surrounding integration that during the 1958 to 59 school year, known as the Lost Year, students and staff were left in limbo as Faubus shut down all of Little Rock's high schools in an attempt to block integration.
I will not force my people to integrate against their will.
By September of 1959, the NAACP had decided that the strain on the families was too great, and only 2 of the 9 were readmitted to Central by 1960. All of the 9 besides Ernest Green completed their education via correspondence or at other high schools. The Little Rock Nine are most notably remembered today for their courage throughout their time at Central High and for their impact on the future of desegregation in the United States. They were one of the very first integration initiatives, and schools in Kansas City, Missouri, Wilmington, and Delaware followed suit. The 9 inspired Ruby Bridges' integration of a New Orleans high school in 1960, leading Norman Rockwell to paint one of the most famous pieces of civil rights artwork. Today, there are statues honoring the Little Rock Nine at the state capitol and outside of Central High. The U.S. Mint created a Little Rock Nine desegregation silver dollar, and the Navy welded their initials into the side of a submarine. They received the NAACP Springer Medal, President Clinton's Congressional Gold Medal, and were invited to President Obama's inauguration. September of 1957 marked a turning point in African American history and in the history of the United States. The Little Rock Nine took the lead in America's long march to freedom, signaling the beginning of the end of Jim Crow and proving that an integrated America was possible.